I've been wanting to kind of briefly talk about this for a little while, but I don't know, for some reason I just never got around to it. So I mean, I know that you're obviously you do your show. It's Too Late. It's a talk show, late night talk show, and I'm sure you got your a lot of your inspiration from Jimmy Fallon and Stephen Colbert. I'm sure you just love those guys,
Jesus
right?
Christ. Why would you do this to me? I thought we were friends.
Sorry, whoops.
So first of all, no, but I will tell you, just to answer that question, if I was picking just one former late night host that is like the predominant inspiration, it's Craig Ferguson.
He is a good one. I do remember seeing him a few times. Yeah,
I sorely miss Craig Ferguson.
You know what's funny that you mentioned that? So so what we're going to talk about is the legacy of Norm Macdonald, and it's actually funny that you mentioned Craig Ferguson, because when he announced that he was leaving, I'm pretty sure Norm Macdonald's name was one of the top names that people were like, oh, Norm Macdonald should totally be the guy to replace him. And that would have been fantastic. I would have been like, I am tuning in every single day. I don't care how late it comes on. I am watching now, or at least recording or something. I got to watch that because that motherfucker is hilarious. Of course, he's one of, if not the best. I mean, like, I think in his Wikipedia page, he's like considered. It says he's considered one of the best guests on talk shows, pretty much. Mm-hmm. And like his chemistry with David Letterman and Conan O'Brien are legendary. I mean, the times he was on there, they're legendary. I mean, you could literally spout off anything. Like obviously the last time he ever did stand up on a late show with David Letterman, that was classic. Him with Courtney Thorne-Smith, that was classic. I mean, you can just name off all these different. My personal favorite of Norm when he was on a talk show was when he was a guest on the Conan O'Brien show. I think it was doing a Tonight Show. He was with Gordon Ramsay doing their little cooking segment, and Gordon trying to be real serious and teaching them how to do this thing, and Norm just kept doing his little jabs. And the one that always cracks me up is when he goes, "Well, do you ever want to become a cook?" and then Gordon goes, "No, it's a chef. Women become cooks," and everyone's like, "Boo!" This is that whole thing. That's my personal favorite one.
I'll never forget. So when he was the appearance he made on Letterman, literally like the day that they announced. What made Letterman so awesome too is that if this were any other celebrity and any other issue, it would have been like in bold letters on your little card, "Do not bring up." Like, our guest says you're not supposed to talk about this, and this, Mm-hmm. Oh, no. That was good. I mean, that was the very first thing that came out of Letterman's mouth was, "I heard you got yourself fired. That's not right, is it?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I did." He's like, "No, that's not the truth." And they go on this whole, and of course Letterman having the history with NBC that he has and stuff. I mean, they just ripping into him, for like a whole, like a double segment of them just ripping into NBC and stuff. But I will say this, anyone could tell you there's a 0% chance that they would have ever allowed someone like Norm take over any of the shows in any of the time slots, because could you imagine them allowing something like Norm Macdonald Live to be coming on every night at 11 o'clock? That they wouldn't allow it. That would never even be discussed. He'd be off. It wouldn't matter what the ratings would be. He'd be out in 6 weeks. They wouldn't, it would either generate too much heat, or it would be the same thing as like with Weekend Update. He's a true comics comic. And if you tell him he can't do something, that's what he's going to write his whole set about the next day. He would have gotten himself fired. It's just he would have. But you're also right. Not only was he an amazing guest, but Norm was one of those that like I appreciated him more the older I got. When I was younger, I didn't realize how much of an influence he was. When I got a little bit older, I realized how much of the brainchild of so much of what was going on was his doing, and then his own kind of quirky, all shucks Canadian sort of stand up and stuff like that. I don't think anyone thinks that Norm Macdonald's like that special that's coming up for him. I don't think anyone expects that's going to get as many views as Chappelle, right? but all of those people, Letterman, Chappelle, you know, whoever, those people thought Norm's the best.
Yeah, I mean, on Chappelle's last special, he basically dedicated it to him.
Yeah, he did.
That's crazy. And yeah, so like for me, I don't even know how I even got to liking him so much. It probably was just some random YouTube video. I'm sure it was one of his appearances on Conan or something like that. But his book, his memoir book was really good too. And I don't know, it seemed like, yeah, he's one of those guys that just seemed like he just wanted to do whatever he wanted to do. Mm-hmm. Even within the confines of, yeah, like on Weekend Update, I'm sure they're like, hey, you can't say this. Like, I'm going to say it anyway. I don't care. And I mean, the fact that he probably lasted as long as he did doing all the OJ jokes that he was doing. I mean, because that was like one of the presumed reasons that he was basically let go was because of that. But it's like he was doing that pretty much for almost this entire time he was the Weekend Update anchor, was the fact that he was just talking about how much OJ was a murderer. Like he's like, no, he's guilty. I don't know what the trial should be over now. Why are we still here?
Yeah.
And
yeah, the first Weekend Update that they had right after that OJ was acquitted, like he had the absolute the Weekend Update started that night, and the very first thing he was is breaking news: murder is now legal in the state of California. Oh my God.
And then they have to actually try to find the killers. If you can see, if you know what this guy is, and it's like literally a picture. It's a picture of OJ. Yeah.
So speaking of that, like talking about some of the specific like pressure points, I don't know if I wouldn't necessarily say he was before his time. I think, you know, I don't think it wasn't so much that he was necessarily a trailblazer. It was just he was really good. B, he absolutely was a standard bearer for I'm not making professional decisions. What like they call it in football a business decision. If you're a cornerback that's only 160 pounds and a running back's coming at you full speed and you get out of the way, that's what they call a business decision because you don't want to get killed. He didn't make business decisions. He said and did whatever the hell he wanted to do. I mean, he was perfectly successful. I don't think he was broke by any stretch of the imagination other than from his gambling problem. But he didn't make business decisions. He said what a good comedian would say and do. But what few things he did that were sort of ahead of his time in a sense was, I'm sure you know because you're such a big fan. I mean, he was making Michael Jackson pedophile jokes when, like, you couldn't even say that on TV, and he was saying it every week. Same thing with O.J. Simpson. Same thing. He was going on, you've probably seen him, he would go on a show like The View and talk about how the Clintons were murderers.
Yeah.
Like in 1998. So it's like, you know, for you or me to say that on our podcast today, it would be funny and not even all that unexpected. For you or me to go on like Fox and Friends and say that would not necessarily be the most unheard of thing, but we probably wouldn't get invited back for being so on the nose on national television. He was saying that on daytime TV in the 90s, dude, and lived to tell the tale at that.
Yeah, and then towards the end of his life, when like Louis C.K. was going through his troubles, and then Norm pretty much defended him, and he was pretty much blacklisted. I think I don't know how like 100% or how much truth there is to it, but I think when all that was going on and he was kind of like Me Too'd or all that stuff.
Yeah,
he was supposed to be on Conan's show around that time, and then he was basically like kicked off because of that, and he never went back on there, which is such a shame when you think about the appearance that he went on there. And when Conan was ending his show at TBS, I mean, he would have been like the perfect guest to have on at least on one of the final shows, but he wasn't there because of all of that, because he was pretty much defending. You're not supposed to defend Louis C.K. Don't you know he did something terrible? But he was like, I can't remember exactly what he said, but he was basically saying, I mean, Louis C.K., what did he do? Like, he did this. Okay, well, I mean, people murdered someone, so I don't know why. I don't know if that was basically what he said, but that was pretty much the gist of it. Was that this is what we're getting mad about? Like, I don't know. So, I mean, that whole thing, I think, was pretty sad, especially when you think too, he went on The View to apologize for his comments, and people were saying, is he trolling? Because he was like being really serious and just kind of saying, yeah, I'm sorry for the things that I said. Or it was just the way that because it was different. Like, it wasn't the usual Norm performance, because usually he's trying to make everyone laugh with his usual way. And I mean, to this day, I think people kind of don't know, like, is he really apologizing, or is he kind of, I don't know what's going on here. And I think that was like part of his charm, was the fact that, like, with his movies, he was just being Norm. Like, even if he was supposed to act, he was still going to be Norm Macdonald. He was like, nobody was going to say that Norm Macdonald was this amazing actor. He was just going to be in Dirty Work, for example. I mean, that's like obviously probably his most famous movie he was in, because he was the lead. That's just Norm Macdonald being Norm Macdonald. I mean, if you're trying to have him be some gangster, like, that's not going to work, Yeah.
He Teachers is another one. So, we recently just went through that whole news cycle there where everyone was calling everyone a groomer, and all the teachers are groomers, and Disney are groomers, and they're all pedophiles, and they all knew Epstein. And you know what? Hey, it's probably true. But Norm Macdonald 20 years ago was doing stand-up bits where he was saying, man, I don't understand why they always give Catholic priests such a hard time. Teachers fuck way more kids than priests do. Like, he was saying that way back then. Of course, I mean, in some sense, you can't get mad, because statistically, he's just correct, right? Like, he's just right about what he's saying. But it's the fact that he would say it. He was saying it in a room where there was people heckling him because they're school teachers or work for public schools. And then he would just like point blank point them out in the audience and say, why is that pedophile so mad at me? So again, it's like he was doing things that you and I would do today to be funny. He was doing it when it took a lot more balls to do it. And he stood to lose a lot more. It's easy for me to go on It's Too Late and say that, and then, move on with my life. He absolutely could have been, commercially bigger, and he wasn't, because he was perfectly content with who he was. And I think that's part of Norm's legacy too, is that outside of being a great comedian, and a great writer, he also was a surprisingly grounded, humble individual. And so for him to have ever done a project where someone handed him $1 million, he was like, oh, that's more money than some random bloke from my small town should have. So I'll just, like, I don't know if you ever saw any of the, like, he lived in a really small apartment, and like still hung out with his mom, and mostly just watched sports and bet on games and stuff. Like, he didn't live extravagantly. A lot of his friends, like the Adam Sandlers and David Spades of the world, it was twisting his arm to ever get him to go out and go to the club, go party with them or whatever, because he just wasn't that kind of guy. And yet he was this massive font of critique and humor that I think in a sort of backhanded sort of way, that's why so many of those other folks in the industry loved him, is because they were like, he's not playing the game. Here I am with a publicist and a marketing agent, and I'm reading talking points off of a fucking note card every time I make an appearance. This guy literally does whatever the fuck he wants, and he's living the dream. Why am I not doing that? I think that they envied him in that regard.
Yeah. So I guess the last thing that I want to say to wrap this up about that is, like, when, like, him passing, and then of course with like Bob Saget and Gilbert Gottfried also passing,
Louis Anderson too.
Oh yeah, Louis Anderson,
yeah,
like pretty much around the same time. Like, that's kind of like that's a dying breed of that type of comic, where I mean, maybe more so Norm and Gilbert Gottfried too, because Gilbert Gottfried also would kind of just went with the stand up and would just do whatever he would do. Like I heard one story, I think I heard Jim Florentine say this, where he was saying that he saw him do stand up one time and he did a joke. It didn't do well. And then I think he was doing some other jokes. And then he did that same joke again, knowing goes like he basically bombed is what the whole story was. But then he went up to Chin, it's like, dude, Gilbert, you bombed. You okay? He's like, dude, that was great. What are you talking about? Them booing me? I got paid already. Who cares? You know, that whole mentality.
Gilbert Gottfried will be legendary for all time for being the guy that told like the first 9/11 joke, right? Like he told a 9/11 joke in New York at like the first public event after 9/11. He set the bar. Like that's one of like the kind of the golden rules of comedy is like it's never, never too soon enough. Like Gilbert Gottfried exemplified that. Him telling that 9/11 joke. And you know what? Not only did he tell the joke, but like if you go back and watch the clip, was there some uneasy tension in the room? Of course there was. But I wouldn't say it bombed. I feel like people were like, this is who can do it. He's opening the door, right? Like someone's got to do it. Someone's got to fall on their sword and tell the joke so that we can say, well, look, I'm not the one that started it. Gilbert Gottfried started it. And he was perfectly content to do that. That didn't bother him in the slightest. But you're definitely right that there's a certain generation. For some reason, it made me think of Bill Burr. And the reason why it made me think of Bill Burr is that a lot of people like Bill Burr. I like Bill Burr. He's a funny guy. He has a lot more of that old school kind of mentality to him. But he is also in Hollywood today. Like he's on The Mandalorian and he's doing movies and he was in Breaking Bad and stuff like that. And I've heard him say in interviews, this is how I know they respected people like Gilbert and Norm so much, is that to hear Bill, because a lot of people in their minds, they think Bill Burr is like that. They think, oh, this is a guy who will say anything. He doesn't play by the rules. He's a maverick. That's not really true. Because for one, if it was, he wouldn't be in a Disney show. That's just number one. And number two, he himself has said that he envies those guys because they're willing to do that. But that for him, he had a kid not that long ago. He's still got young children, and he hasn't. Some of those guys were making their bucks like in the 90s when Bill Burr was, riding in the back of the bus with other people traveling around trying to get on stage. Like he's a household name today, but he hasn't quite had his full 15 minutes of fame yet. So I think for people like Bill Burr, his attitude is, let me finish my 15 minutes, let me make my money, and then I'll go say verbatim anything Norm or Gilbert would have said. It would have been fine. But let me make sure my kids are taken care of and stuff like that. Which in some sense, because this is another thing that's this applies not just to comedy, but like to some of our friends and family and people to Jason Rink, to everything we've talked about all night in cancel culture, is I used to be one of those libertarian types who would get mad at people because they would hide behind an avatar, not use their real name, not be willing to take a stand, draw a line somewhere, and put their money where their mouth was. But and while I still wish more people would, it's not that I haven't completely moved from that position. I do at least understand that look what happened to those people. Look what happened to Jason. Look what happened. I mean, you see this every day, all the time. Look what happens to these people when they say and do the wrong thing. And so, not to sound terribly condescending, but I think a fairly condescending way to put it is, sometimes the people that are highest on their high horse about being willing to sacrifice everything don't have a lot to offer. It's a whole lot different for someone who has, a lifelong career, millions of dollars to lose, for them to take a stand than it is for someone, for the cashier at Kmart. So not that, all life is sacred, even Kmart cashiers, but I think you see what I'm saying, that, I wish that Bill Burr would just go all out on Hollywood 24/7, like that one time Ricky Gervais did at the Academy Awards or whatever? Of course I would. But if he looked me in the eye and said, I gotta make sure that my kid's college fund is paid for first, I would be like, hey, I get it. because we live in a world, because Bill Burr's not stupid, and he knows that we live in a world where when the day comes that he decides to fire his mouth off, that'll be the fucking end of him. He knows that.